Welcome everyone to the third round of Lindores Abbey Chess 2019. It's Ding Liren with the white pieces against Karjakin, and the players are blitzing out their initial moves. It's a Catalan, and Ding Liren plays his queen to b3. This is much less common than queen to c2. Karjakin replies with knight to b6, a very concrete move attacking the pawn on c4. White can now take on d5 or push c5 as Ding Liren does in the game, and the knight moves to c4. So this is what Sergei's plan was, and Ding Liren moves his queen back to c2. The threat now can be to move the bishop and play the pawn to b3, trapping the knight on c4. But Karjakin is not going to let Ding do that, and he breaks the pawn with b6, and immediately c6 was played. The pawn on c6 is a thorn in black's position. It cramps black's queen side. However, what Karjakin does is he plays around the pawn. He plays a5, bishop a6, and also now the knight has a square to go back to on d6. But the white knight can also jump to e5 and then use this pawn on c6 for some of its ideas. All in all, the position has become very strategically complicated. There you go. Karjakin plays his pawn to a5 and is all ready to put his bishop on a6. Ding Liren replies with his bishop going to f4. Bishop goes to a6, and now rook to d1, a useful move in the Catalan. Here h6 was a waiting move by Karjakin, and knight moves to e5. Queen e8. This move attacks the pawn on c6, and in some lines after the knight moves from f6, black could play the move f7, f6, and his queen can be activated on the other diagonal. Ding Liren gains some space on the queen side with the move a4, and now starts the concrete play. Knight into e5, and Ding must take with the pawn. Bishop into e5 is absolutely toothless. He takes on e5 with the pawn, and Sergei now has a deep think. Where should he play his knight? Of course, knight g4 looks normal, but there's also knight h5 and knight to h7. These moves are to be considered. And he goes for the move knight to g4, fumbles a bit with his knight, and Ding Liren plays the move h3. He doesn't see the point. Knight into f2, what a sacrifice. Ripping open the king. And after king into f2, it turns out that white is in the driver's seat. We come to the critical position where white has just taken on e5 and Karjakin played knight to g4. As it turns out, this is not a very good idea. He should have played his knight to h5. The thing which he was afraid of, and he mentioned in the post-game conference, was that after bishop e3, the knight on h5 could be trapped with the move g4. The most logical move now was f6, but both the players didn't really consider this because they thought that the knight would be trapped with g4. However, after f into e5, g into h5, queen into h5, this is just a very dominating position for black. He has an open file for the rook, his bishop is very active, and so is his queen. Instead, after bishop e3, f6, white must try to go for f4 instead of g4, and after g5, the position is very complicated. In the game, Karjakin played his knight to g4, but after h3, knight f2, king f2, bishop c5, bishop e3, the bishops were exchanged, and it looked like the king is very weak on e3, but here Ding Liren had prepared a very nice idea, as we shall see in the game. Karjakin gives a check on c5, And now Ding Liren is thinking whether he should block the check with a pawn on e3 or move his king to f1. I guess bishop e3 is very logical and Ding goes for it. Sergey takes on e3, and after king e3 he plays his pawn to f6. Now the king on e3 is looking very vulnerable. It's right in front of his army, and although white is a piece up, his king is not at all safe. So how did Ding Liren solve this problem? He first took on f6, and after Sergey recaptured on f6 with his rook, he came up with a very nice idea in the position. First of all, it's important to stop black's activity along the f file, and hence Ding played his bishop to f3. Now Karjakin, not really seeing a way as to how he can break in, played his queen to e7. And this is where Ding came up with his fine plan. He moved his king to d2, and Karjakin played queen d6, but here's the trick. King to c1 immediately, and the king has actually long castled in a way, because now it's very safe on c1 and white simply has an extra piece. Sergey did manage to gather another pawn with queen into g3, but after rook to a3, the rook had activated itself along the third rank. The other rook joined on f8, but now Ding Liren's moves were very easy. Knight went to c3. And black has right now 2 pawns for the piece, but that's not at all enough. King h8, knight to b5, attacking the pawn on c7 in some lines, and the knight is very strong on b5. It has to go. So Karjakin had to take on b5, but that just meant that the position was getting more and more simplified. Bishop d5, ab5. I like how Ding Liren takes his time in such positions. After queen to h4, you can see he has 14 minutes on the clock. King to b1 first, not here. After rook f4, now he has 14 minutes on the clock, and he thinks for 4 minutes before playing his rook to e3. So this was now, he was sure that he's winning. He's attacked the pawn on e6. After Karjakin's rook f6 comes bishop to g4. The e6 pawn is hanging. Black is just lacking material. After rook c4, queen d3. Rook to b4. White is now simply crashing through. Ding Liren takes on e6, and that's all over. Karjakin resigned the game. Ding Liren's idea after f6, ef6, rook f6 to put his bishop on f3 and then move his king from d2 to c1 was just so very powerful. You can see how the king from g1 went to f2, e3, d2, c1, where it was completely safe. And then it was all about consolidating, which he did very easily. He just played his rook to e3, and Karjakin had no better thing than to resign here. One important point to note is that in Kolkata Tata Steel in November, this exact same position was reached by Vidit against Karjakin, and there Vidit had played queen c2, c6, rook d1. This is how the game progressed. It was quite different from what had happened here, but now you will see the similarities, that there is no real knight on c4 for black. It has been exchanged, and the bishop is on a6, and now black went for rook c8, knight c3, and knight g4. As you will see, after h3, now knight into f2 is absolutely fine, and Karjakin was simply able to draw this game without any difficulties, as it happened here. It was just a draw in 24 moves. And this exact line was playing in his head in this very position, and that's the reason why he went for knight g4. But as it turns out, here there is no way the queen can reach to the b6 square to create counterplay. He did try with f6, but it was clearly insufficient. And this is how, at the top level, players can get confused because they have played certain things in their certain games. Karjakin did make an error here, but Liren played very well to win the game.